The domain aggregate functions are a useful set of functions that will help you parse out information from the database and calculate values over the entire column, or what's referred to as a domain, of a data table or a record set. Let's see how we can use a domain aggregate function to enhance the query that we created earlier called Employee Recognition Program. Here in this query, we were gathering the employee IDs, their first name and last name, and we calculated their lifetime sales across the company. We also had previously used a switch function here to determine whether they were in the Platinum, Gold, Silver, or Bronze recognition program. I want to use this query as a basis for our next query. Let's go ahead and close this out, and we'll start a new query in Design View. Now, instead of showing a table here, what I want to do is switch over to the tab called Queries, and from there, I'll double-click on Employee Recognition Program. Let's go ahead and say Close. Now, to this query, I want to add all of the fields that are in the Employee Recognition Program. I can either add them one at a time by double-clicking on each of these lists here, or I can double-click on the asterisk to add everything at once. And if I press Run Query, we'll get a duplicate of the Employee Recognition Program query. All right, let's go into Design View, and we'll start adding in some additional columns. I'm going to go to this next column and right-click and say Build. Here, I'm going to dig into my Functions group. We'll go into Built-in Functions, and we'll find a group category called Domain Aggregate. The domain aggregate functions all start with the letter D to indicate that they apply a function across a column of data. Let me show you what that means. I'm going to double-click on the one called daverage. The daverage function has three different arguments: expression, domain, and criteria. If I look down here in the hyperlink down below, I can see that criteria is wrapped in square brackets, which means that it's optional. Let's go ahead and get rid of it, as we're not going to use it here. That leaves me with two arguments, the expression and the domain. The expression is going to be the name of a column from a table or query, and the domain is the name of the table or query that column comes from. We're going to wrap both of these in quotation marks because they act as string entries. Let's go ahead and click on expression here, and let's say I want to calculate the average of the column called lifetime sales from that Employee Recognition Program query. To do that, I'll type in a quotation mark and a square bracket. Then I'll type in lifetime sales, a closing bracket, and a closing quote. So we're going to average up the lifetime sales column, and here in the domain, I specify where that's coming from. So again, in quotation marks, I'll type in a square bracket, and I'll type in Employee Recognition Program. I'll close it with a bracket and finish it with a quote. So we're going to calculate the average across the column called lifetime sales in the Employee Recognition Program query. Let's go ahead and say OK, and run it to see if it works. Now I can see I get the value here that's the average of all of these values over here. The expression is returning 346,000, which if we take a look at the middle of our data somewhere in here, we can see that that number falls between these two values here. So each one of these records here is the average of this entire column. Let's go back into Design View, and we'll add another one. I'm going to come over here, right-click, and say Build. This time, I want to find the maximum value in the lifetime sales column. To do that, I'll go into my Functions, Built-in Functions, Domain Aggregate, and we're going to find one called dmax. Now this works exactly the same way. First, we'll get rid of this criteria column. Then, we're going to go to the expression and tell it which column of data we want to dmax across. In this case, it's going to be the same lifetime sales. The domain is going to be the name of the query. So again, in quotation marks, an opening bracket, Employee Recognition Program. We'll finish it with a closing bracket and a closing quote. Now we're calculating the maximum value from the lifetime sales column in the Employee Recognition Program query. Let's go ahead and say OK, and run it to see that result. Oh, looks like I have an error here. Let's go in and check it out. Go back into the builder, and it looks like I have a single quote here instead of a double quote. So let me get rid of that and fix it with a double quote. All right, that looks good. We'll go ahead and run it. And now we get the expression here that returns 493,000, which corresponds to this highest value here. So now that I'm able to calculate both the average here and the maximum of this column here, what we can do is use these for further calculations. For instance, it'd be interesting to see how far above or below the average each of these employees are. It'd also be interesting to see how far away each employee is from the top spot. Let's go ahead and do both of those. I'll go into Design View, and in this first column here, I'll right-click and say Build to jump back into the Expression Builder. Now all I need to do is subtract this daverage function here from the original lifetime sales value to figure out how far away they are above or below the average. In this case, I'm going to come here after the colon, and I'm going to type in a reference to the lifetime sales field. I'll type in a square bracket, And then we'll start with the name of the query that's in the employee recognition program. I'll close it with a bracket, and I'll type a period, and then I'll open a bracket, and we're looking for the lifetime sales field. I'll do a closing bracket, and then we'll type in the minus operator. So it's going to take the employee recognition program lifetime sales field, and we're going to subtract the average of the lifetime sales. Let's go ahead and give it a better alias here. We'll call this above, below, average. Okay, let's go ahead and say OK to that. And we'll do the same thing with this dmax one. I'll right-click on it and say build. Here, we'll go to the beginning here. And we'll go ahead and type in a reference to the lifetime sales field again. So I'm going to open a square bracket, employee recognition program. This time, because I put spaces here after the colon, but before the dmax, Access is determining that I can use the IntelliSense feature here. So in this case, I can just use my arrow keys to select employee recognition program and press enter. I'll type in the period, and then I can use the arrow keys to select lifetime sales and press enter again. And then I'll type in the minus sign. Now the name of this column here, I'm going to rename the alias to distance to top spot. Let's go ahead and say OK. And that'll enter in this query down here. Once again, I'll run this query. And it looks like I get this enter parameter value box. That means I have a typo here. And I can see it right here. It says recognition instead of recognition. Let's go ahead and go fix that. It looks like it's going to be in the above below query. So let's go back in. We'll right click, go back into the builder, and we'll find where I misspelled it here. Looks like I misspelled it a couple of times. Right there, recognition. Okay, now it looks good. We'll say OK. We'll run it. And this time everything works perfectly. So now I can see how much each employee is above or below the average value from the lifetime sales. I can also see how far each employee is from taking over that top spot. So that's a quick example of how we can leverage the domain functions to gather summary calculations across an entire column from an existing table or query. Once we have the summary value in hand, in this case an average and a maximum sales figure, we're able to further use them in calculations that provide further insight into our data.